Oh, is it as in the songs from Friday Fretworks?
If you would just take every sort of, I mean, I would love to hear you noodle all day.
I mean, that can be arranged. For a price, I can follow you around if you want. That's a good question. I get that question a lot. I guess I kind of I'd thought to a degree that I might do something with those tracks. I mean, there's two answers to this. The romantic answer is that I kind of plan to do something with those tracks and turn it into a proper album. For the most part, filming Friday Fretworks, when I was doing it really frequently, as in every Friday, it was a bit of a kind of, not chore, but it's a lot of effort. And the actual playing guitar in those videos is about 20% of the work. The rest of it is writing the script, it's filming, it's having to reconcile with having to look at myself in a camera all day, every day, and then having to look at myself when I edit myself. So the actual guitar playing was such a small part of that video that when I sit down to play guitar in those videos, for the most part, the mentality is like, let's just get it done, because then there's so much other stuff to kind of crack on with and edit the video, etc., etc. So I was never like hugely proud of those tracks, I guess, in terms of wanting to put them out as a proper release. That's the romantic answer. The actual answer is a lot of the drum tracks on those songs are stolen from other songs. So I guess legally I'd probably be on dodgy ground if I started releasing them on Spotify. Taylor Hawkins, bless him. I've had a lot of use of the Taylor Hawkins drum tracks. It was honestly, drums are always, when you're making a backing track like that, drums are always the hardest bit, because using like software drums or any of that kind of like MIDI drum type thing, they're quite uninspiring for the most part. They're very rigid, very stiff. So it got to a point where I kind of felt like I'd exhausted all the stuff I could do with MIDI drums. I just started going on YouTube and typing in like isolated drum tracks. And for the most part, it would be songs that I wasn't even familiar with, because I would just download them, listen to it, go, that's a cool groove, let's write something over the top of that groove. And then every now and then you'd have someone go, that's Rope by the Foo Fighters. I'm like, no, don't know what you're on about. But for the most part, it was just tracks that I wasn't even particularly familiar with. You know, I would just download a drum groove and play something that kind of felt right over that. But I guess that's an actual excuse. I don't know whether that excuse would work in court. So I thought better to kind of stay away from it. But at some point, I will. The plan is to kind of do something with those tracks. You know, some of the better ones, some of the ones which I was kind of prouder with, and some of the ones that I wouldn't get sued for using. Actually release them in some guide. I had a idea of kind of maybe turning it into, like, I know I'm not naive enough to think that the people who watch Friday Fretworks are guitar players, guitar nerds like me, like you, for the most part, who probably want to dig into it a little bit deeper, whether it's the tone, whether it's the tabs, whether it's the whatever. So rather than just making it an album that is on Spotify, I thought it'd be cool to kind of turn it into a bit of a more of an interactive thing of like, it's music, it's tabs, it's a bit of a deep dive into the tones and the gear used on each track, and turn it into a whole thing, which is a great idea, but I'm the laziest man in the world, so that's never going to happen. But I will get around to something at some point. So yeah, thank you though. It still blows my mind that, I mean, this is literally my first time in Sweden, and there's a whole room of you kind of turned out to watch me. It's also my last time in Sweden. I wanted there to be more of you. I think Friday Fretworks is a huge part of that. It's just this kind of worldwide platform that kind of people just continually discover you on. Even having stopped it or stopped doing it as frequently as I used to do it, still just the amount of people who kind of discovered me through that is mind blowing. So thank you. Cheers. And red is the color now. How the I've kind of spoken about it a lot in the past. I think the one kind of continual source of inspiration I have is not so much guitar players so much as vocalists, and trying to kind of in some small way sound like Sam Cooke or Aretha Franklin, and I'm terrible for not listening to as much music as I should. I just listen to podcasts all day long, as I'm extremely boring. If you want to know anything about the Titanic, I'm your man. So I'm honestly, I don't listen to as much music, and I definitely kind of don't listen to as much like guitar music as I probably should. But I think the last guy that I kind of just stumbled across out in the blue that kind of blew my mind a little bit was Nick Johnston. Don't know whether you know Nick Johnston. Just like such a tasteful player, but obviously like capable of all of that stuff, which my fingers just categorically refuse to do. And as long as I have a hole in my arse, I'm not going to be able to do any of the kind of stuff he does. But still, it's kind of, if you have that kind of like technical like virtuosity, it's hard to kind of like toe that line, I guess, of it always being tasteful and not just descending into look what I can do, you know. But Nick seems to kind of nail that every time. So yeah, that was probably the last kind of guitar discovery I had, but that was probably a while back. So it's just vocalists. It's just, you know, stumbling across, and not my favorite vocalists a lot of the time are not even like traditionally great singers. The moment you say that you kind of draw inspiration from singers, everyone's kind of thinking, well, it's going to be Paul Rodgers or it's going to be Otis Redding, and all of those are huge influences of mine. But I love vocalists whose voices tell a story and are kind of, you know, the conduit to get the song across, whether it's people that you wouldn't necessarily pinpoint as having like a great voice, like Bruce Springsteen or Mark Knopfler, like characterful voices. The fact that Mark Knopfler is an incredible guitar player is kind of by the by. It's this incredible characterful voice. Clapton as well. Clapton's got a great voice, which kind of flies under the radar. So it's just voices that I kind of am immediately attracted to. And it's, yeah, kind of the guitar kind of thing. It's what I find weird is playing these songs, like Tell Me How It Feels Then especially, playing that song but without singing backing vocals is really strange, because I'm like, ordinarily I'm singing pretty much all of the choruses throughout that track, I'm singing, and then the moment I'm not having to sing, I'm like, what am I doing? I've never given this a moment's attention in my life because I'm otherwise singing. And discussing it earlier with the Yamaha guys over dinner, like my favorite part of a gig every night is when I'm singing. And I'm crap at singing. I've got a voice like a goose farting in the fog. I'm really, really not a singer. But it's the bit where, like, I've practiced a lot at, you know, kind of I've put a lot of effort into harmonies and trying to kind of consistently nail those every night. The guitar thing is kind of by the by, really. That just kind of does what it does. So it's... Yeah, absolutely. And just, yeah, kind of practicing that and kind of, you know, that's kind of where my heart is, I guess. And same with influences. It's singers, it's songwriters, it's, you know, those kind of things. So, but yeah, I don't know, Slash. Joking aside, we get the two countries which are not on the tour, which we get so many requests from, just Scandinavia in general, and Italy. And they're the two obvious omissions from the tour. The reason being, just trying to find the right promoter, basically, trying to find the right promoter. The weird thing with our band is that I think because of like my YouTube presence and that being this kind of like almost backdoor to discovering a band, you know, all of the traditional ways that promoters look at, like a case in point, we did a show in Vienna year before last, and we'd never played in Austria before, certainly never played in Vienna before, and the promoter was amazed that the gig sold out very quickly because he'd never heard of us. And we met the promoter the night after at another show, and he said it's weird because the only like metric that we have to judge how many people might turn up at a show is like your Spotify numbers and how many people listen to your music online. And he was like, your Spotify numbers are actually quite relatively low for a band that have just pulled as many people as you have. He was like, what's that all about? And I was like, well, it's social media, it's YouTube, it's, you know, kind of people discovering us through other avenues, you know. And consequently, that makes it quite difficult sometimes to, like the US tour we're doing in the summer, trying to get promoters to like actually take a punt on a band that they've not necessarily heard of. Like we couldn't get a New York show for Love Nor Money initially, and then it sold out in 24 hours, and now the promoter's going, oh, we've always loved you. I tell you what, we'll do a bigger venue. And you're like, oh, great, yeah, I'm glad, you know, welcome to the party. And it's the same in countries that you've never played before. I know by virtue of how many messages I get from people in Sweden and in Denmark, and, you know, I know there's a lot of people out here who want to see me. Trying to get that message across to promoters is hard. And they'll go, yeah, cool, we'll give you 40 quid to come and play in, kind of Gothenburg. You're like, well, as much as I would love to do that, we're all going to be homeless by the end of the tour, So stuff like this massively helps. I'm going to get a photo of all of you later and put it on my social media, and people will be like, oh, well, clearly people want to see him in Sweden. So we're hoping to come back to Europe in kind of like February, March next year, and Scandinavia and Italy are going to be two of the places on those runs. So. Right, let's do another song. I'm going to play you a solo that, speaking of YouTube, had a fairly kind of like transformative effect on my life, I guess, which is all of about 30 seconds long. Some of you might recognize it if you spend far too much time on YouTube. And it sounds a bit like this. Bit being an operative word. Cheers. So that was, did anyone recognise that? Paul Davids. So that was a very brief solo for me anyway, by my lengthy standards. The Paul Davids asked me to contribute to a video back in 2020, kind of like mid-2020. It was 10 guitar players in a video basically asked to improvise. There was a little bit of ambiguity on the improvisation part, but basically contribute a solo to a track. And he uploaded the video. The video had a load of views, kind of 14 billion, I don't know, a couple of million views. And kind of around the right time, I guess, in all honesty. It happened during COVID when I kind of needed a little bit of a boost, I guess. My little boy had just been born, so it was kind of like a weird time. All of the avenues that I kind of traditionally had to make money as a musician kind of evaporated overnight. And then that solo kind of went viral. Paul had a really cool reaction to it in the video. And just everything went a bit berserk. My YouTube channel went through the roof. Consequently, how much I was earning from YouTube at the time went through the roof as well, which was particularly helpful at that moment in time when you suddenly have this little screaming thing in front of you who costs money, a lot of money. So that, all of the things I've done, all of the kind of things that you look at objectively, like playing with Slash and solos being voted in whatever, all of these like cool accolades and stuff, genuinely, that was probably the thing which has changed my life the most. So I owe Paul Davids an incredible kind of debt of gratitude there, and it's probably the solo that still to this day I get tagged in one of those on Instagram, someone covering it every single day. It's just incredibly cool because it was something that genuinely, naively looking back, given Paul's size and his reputation on YouTube, I didn't give that anywhere near the amount of attention which I probably should have. I think if I had, in hindsight, I probably would have ballsed it up because I would have been nervous. But I was so busy with the fact that I just had this kind of baby. I was like, yeah, cool, let's just rattle that off. It took me about half an hour, and away it went. And it just had this transformative effect on my life. And like I said, it's something that I guess, looking back, is kind of like a little microcosm of my approach to soloing generally, just in terms of its structure, in terms of its pacing, in terms of where I start on the neck and where I end on the neck. Something that I use, arguably overuse all of the time, is this idea of starting low, aim high. It tells a story, it tells a narrative. Tell me how it feels, the first solo I did tonight. First, however many bars of the solo that is, I've not got past the 4th fret. And you look at that objectively for quite a long solo, and you're like, what are you doing? That's mental. Why just, play something cool, For me, it's, like I said, it's telling a story. It's building this kind of narrative and taking people on a little bit of a journey with it. And that's the suspense. That's the bit where you hook them in and make them listen. If I started the solo with the bit which everyone covers, everyone covers better than me. Where do you go from there? That's it. You've hit the ceiling. You've all manner of inappropriate euphemisms. You've kind of done it. Where do you go? There is literally nowhere to go. You've run out of frets. Start low, aim high. Paul David solo. Start at about as low as you can physically get on the neck. Halfway through the solo, about as high as I've got on the fretboard is about the 8th fret, which everyone approaches solos differently. Everyone approaches music differently. There's absolutely no right or wrong way. But for me, it always makes sense to kind of follow this kind of start low, aim high. And then the second half of the solo starts pretty much identically to the first bit, albeit up the octave. Has several effects, kind of instantly draws the listener in as to kind of like, oh, I recognize that because I've just heard that a couple of seconds earlier, but now it's in a different register and it's taken you somewhere different. It's led your ear somewhere different. Same harmony. It's not remotely flashy. It's not particularly complex. It's just quite a nice, simple, melodic idea executed relatively well. It would have been better if I'd given it the attention it deserved, to be honest. But that is about my approach to building solos. And that's the kind of question I get asked most frequently, I guess, is what time do you finish? And how do you build solos? How do you make them interesting? And it's something we're all guilty of, I guess, as guitar players at some point, is knowing how long you have for a solo and not necessarily knowing how to fill that. And you just resort to type. You just think, well, I'm going to run my scales. I'm going to play all of my flash licks. I'm going to kind of do the stuff which I know is kind of impressive. And all you do there is just mindlessly babble. It's the linguistic or musical equivalent of just talking without any gaps in your sentences, any kind of up until downs, any just kind of, it's all at one monotonous level. Let it breathe. Play as you talk, where you emphasize certain notes and you really put an emphasis on others while you kind of back off from others. It's expressive, it's articulate, it's musical, it's kind of human, I guess. And again, I kind of drag it back to this idea of like trying to sound like a singer. That's everything for me, is listening to all my favorite vocalists and listening to their inflections, listening to their idiosyncrasies, listening to how they approach getting that message across that they want to say. Anyway, just Wonderwall. Right, I'm going to do another song. Anyone with any questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Cool, yes.
Yeah, do you think a lot about how you end the tone in the solo? Like when you then start another...
Yeah, as in kind of like note choice. Yeah.
So you can feel that, this sounds... well, you can end of anything, but then go... But
yeah,
natural...
Absolutely.
How do you think?
Really weirdly, I remember overhearing a conversation, and it must have on some level been quite poignant because it stuck with me. I would have been about 15 maybe, and I was in a music shop in Cardiff, and there was a guy in there a little bit older than me, quite a decent guitar player, like shredding his ass off, giving it everything, gone into a music store with his kind of new licks and wanted to play all of his impressive stuff. And the guy behind the counter, as people who work in music shops tend to, have heard it all and have thoroughly bored of hearing it all. And he was just kind of throwing like slightly sly kind of like digs at the guy going, yeah, exactly, yeah. And the one thing he said to him that kind of like really piqued my ear was like, focus on what notes you're ending on, because you're just ending on random notes. And the guy playing didn't seem to kind of understand what he was kind of getting at or what he was saying. But it really stuck with me as to kind of like, oh yeah, that like we put so much thought into what notes we start on and all of the notes in between, and then we're just guilty of just randomly ending. And it's like equate it to a sentence or speaking. You end on a word or an inflection or a kind of like a nuance in your voice, which makes sense. If I try and end a sentence on a if I try and say something where I end on an up inflection, that's just weird. That doesn't feel right. That kind of, what's happening. It's the same with soloing. So, I mean, there are very obvious ways of doing that, like that Paul David one then. That just resolves beautifully. If you can end that somewhere else, it would work. Like musically, it would work, but it doesn't have the same sense of like resolution and like, oh, that was nice. That's finished. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've painted a picture. You've kind of finished your paragraph or you've finished your sentence. So a lot of this stuff that I do, like thought process into what tone or what kind of harmony or what note to finish on, I do give thought to that stuff, but like so subconsciously that the moment someone asks me in a clinic to try and reverse engineer it, I'm like, I don't know. I do think about this stuff, but it's like fairly innate at this point because I've been doing it so long. And you just end on what feels right, I guess. What feels nice, what feels like it completes the picture.
Maybe that also combines, like you said before, like you listen to a lot of singers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where the chorus ends
Yep.
or starts or whatever.
Absolutely. He had a great quote recently. It's an amazing guitar player and singer actually called Marcus King, American guy. Yeah, incredible guitar player and incredible singer as well. The bastard. And he was quoting, I think his dad actually. He was kind of paraphrasing his dad's quote. He said, "Your melody ain't worth a damn if you don't want to reference it in your guitar solo." Which straight away I was like, oh, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. And it was something that I kind of like straight away thought, oh, I kind of do that quite a lot. Again, not thinking about it. But, when we write songs with a band, the guitar solo, 9 times out of 10, if there is a guitar solo, is kind of the last thing that you do in a literal sense when you're recording or in a kind of a writing sense. It's not as though you're kind of going, right, let's never mind about the chorus. Lads, I've got a guitar solo to figure out. It doesn't really work like that. So by the time I get to the guitar solo, I've had like maybe 2-3 rehearsals of hearing Tom's melody develop, hearing what he's singing, hearing his phrasing, hearing his inflections. And especially at this point, I've been in a band with him for so long that we can kind of second guess each other as to kind of what we're going to do or what we're going to play or what we're going to say, finish each other's sentences, etc., that so much of our kind of like little inflections as players kind of creep into each other's playing. Someone asked us about it in an interview recently, and I said exactly that. I said I subconsciously referenced Tom a lot, his like phrasing or his melodies. And he was like, oh, cool, I do the same. I was like, oh, there we go. It's a reciprocal thing. I've never thought of it, but we just kind of bounce off each other, And again, melodically, this just... if you're struggling for what to do in a guitar solo, just play the song's melody. Like one of the most effective, brilliant guitar solos of all time, and I undoubtedly get shit for saying this, is Smells Like Teen Spirit. It's just the vocal melody, but you give any guitar player on earth those 16 bars, whatever it is, in that song and go play a solo there, no one could come up with anything better than just playing the song's melody. Nothing else would have fit so beautifully and taken you back into a chorus. You could play something clever, you could play something complex, you could play something really interesting and musical. It's not going to be as good as just... And it wasn't because it was Kurt Cobain, it was just because he literally played the song's melody. Just do that. Sometimes that's all it takes, is just to play the song's melody. Some of my favourite solos that I've done are just that, super simple bits where you just play whatever the singer has been singing, and it just works. It just works beautifully within that musical context. So, and again, note choice and tone choice and stuff like that, just listen to singers. Singers inherently want to finish on the right note because it musically makes sense and it kind of gives this sense of resolution, So, yeah, cool. Let me play another track and then we'll see if anyone got any more questions. Also tonight, this is the beauty of P90s. Middle position. That gig I mentioned in Vienna, that will forever live in my memory. That was under a railway track, and it was as bad as I've ever experienced. And it wasn't even that it was loud, but it was an actual note. It was a tone that was consistent all night. And what was particularly funny about it was not only the note C, which I don't think, it turns out we don't have a single song in the set in the key of C, and also it wasn't C, it was not that, it was this. So all night playing like a song in F. Beautiful. That was a long evening. We also got arrested on the way to the gig. We're banned from Austria. Turns out, you've set me off now. Turns out Austrians have very strict laws about how much your van can weigh, and if, hypothetically speaking, you're in a van which has a legal weight limit of 3.5 tons. Hypothetically speaking, if you're in a van that weighs 4.5 tons, they tend not to like that, and they tend to fine you quite heavily. And then, if the guitarist in the band says, "What's the odds of being stopped twice in the same day for the same thing?" Turns out that's also quite high. The first time was like super official. We got taken into kind of like a lay-by off the side of a motorway and put on a weigh station, and the guy kind of clearly was loving the fact that we were like quite heavy. I mean, have you seen Tom? Have you seen our singer for one? He's a big lad. It's funny, instantly, as soon as the guy came back to the van going, "You're overweight," everyone goes. And Tom's like, "I ain't that big." So the first guy was like super official, everything like paperwork, everything kind of like by the book, you know, it was worked out. The fine was commensurate with how much you were overweight, etc., etc. They basically told us we couldn't leave because we were overweight. So we had the brilliant idea of like, well, dump gear. Luckily, it was a nice day. We dumped a load of gear on the side of the motorway. And the official plan was that Nathan, our merch seller and driver and general dog's body, was going to drive us to the local train station, chuck us on the train. We would get the train to Vienna. He would drive to Vienna, about 2 hours away, and we would meet him in Vienna. And then while we were on the way to the train station, I had the brilliant idea of like, we can't get stopped twice in the same day for the same thing. And everyone went along with it, dropped us off at a petrol station. Nathan went back, picked up all the gear, came back, picked us up, and off we went to Vienna. But an hour and a half later, blue lights behind us. Got pulled in, and the policeman was like, "Well, good news and bad news. Bad news is pretty much sparks coming off the back of the van. I can see you're overweight. The good news is," he's like, "What did he say?" He's like, "The good news, good news and good news. Good news is I'm the last policeman that you were like, or the bad news is I'm the last policeman that you were likely to encounter between here and Vienna. The good news is I'm the last policeman that you're likely to encounter between here and Vienna." We're like, "Right, understood. How much?" He was like, €200. Like, "Okay, I take it we don't get a receipt?" "No." Cash, yeah? Cash, yeah. Cool, thank you, see you later. €200, and he had a vinyl off us. Cheeky.
That I cannot hide, yeah. And it's killing me inside.
So this is an Epiphone. This is my Yamaha Revstar. Might have guessed. They've even put me on a Yamaha stool. It's amazing. This is a Revstar. This is the main guitar that I've been playing since pretty much since the day I had it, actually, 2020. Rewind to about 2016. I guess some of you, if you've been kind of watching me for a while, you probably will have seen me playing a Strat. I was a Strat guy for a very long time. And I love Strats. I've got some great Strats that will forever hold a special place in my heart. I got a little bit bored, I think, with the idea that the moment you plug a Strat in and you go on any of the in-between positions and you do anything that sounds like... I was like, John Mayer! It's like, yeah, fair one. Yeah, it does sound a bit like John Mayer. But he's not the only guy that's ever played a Strat. And he's certainly not the only guy that's ever played a Strat with a clean sound. Likewise, the moment you put a Strat on a middle position or a bridge position and play like... I was like, Stevie Ray! You're like, yeah, I know, I know. I guess point being, there's a lot of baggage with a Strat that it's kind of hard. Maybe some players, better players than me, can get around that, cannot let it kind of, burrow into their minds, I guess. But it started to become a little bit of a bugbear of mine that there were so many kind of reference points for a Strat that the moment you played anything which sounded vaguely like anyone else, which everything pretty much does, everyone kind of is so quick to kind of point out the kind of influence behind it, which is cool. But I think subconsciously, whether I gave this much thought process at the time, I kind of wanted a bit of a fresh start or a kind of clean break, I guess. And the Revstar spoke for me for a couple of reasons. A, I loved its simplicity. So this is kind of more indicative of the first generation of Revstar. The newer ones are slightly bigger in the body, but I guess the fundamental difference is, aside from the chambered kind of thing, which we'll get to in a minute, the new ones are a 5-way switch, which sound great. I prefer the simplicity of this being a 3-way. It's kind of, for a Luddite like me, up, down, or middle works better in my mind than kind of like, where can I find that one? Which is, Strats are great, but that's one of the bugbears of a Strat, I guess, is kind of like, oh, I want to get the middle position. Give me a minute. There it is. Not really massively practical in the heat of battle. Whereas just the simplicity of the Revstar really spoke to me. I just thought it was such a well-balanced, well-made guitar. The first one that I picked up was amazing, and it just spoke to me straight away. The other thing, I think, on a subconscious level, I was like, that's new. That's an entirely new guitar design, which doesn't really kind of like, it's not derived, obviously, from anything else. 95% of guitars that come out today, as I look over at Silver Sky, are kind of derived from something else, whether it's a Strat, whether it's a Tele, whether it's a Les Paul. There are kind of echoes of that with this, of maybe like an early Les Paul configuration. The shape itself is kind of indicative of the old Superflighters or like SG2000s the Yamaha did back in the day. But it's principally a new guitar without any baggage, without any association. And I just saw that as a bit of an opportunity of kind of like, oh, well, that's a fresh start. If I play one of those, nobody can go, oh, you look like... well, no, you don't look like anyone because it's a new guitar. And we just clicked. As much as you can click with an inanimate object, we clicked, and we're very much in love. So that was in about 2016, I guess. So I had a couple of years of kind of getting to know the Revstar, and then Yamaha very kindly said, do you want a custom shop model? I was like, oh, yeah, amazing, yeah. And they're like, we can make you anything you want, anything. I was like, can you just make that one in gold, please? And they were like, you can have anything you want, anything. I was like, oh, yeah, sorry, gold, nitrocellulose, please. So much to their kind of vexation, I think. This is essentially the old 502, the old kind of iteration of the 502. Wrap over tailpiece, 2P90s, 3-way switch. When I had it initially, I liked the idea of it being 2 volume controls. So that being the neck volume, that being the bridge volume. Great in theory, crap in principle, because you can't do volume swells all the way down there. So about a week after having it, I had that kind of reverted to being a master tone pot. So it's essentially identical to the old 502, but in nitrocellulose. And I love the idea of it being in nitrocellulose because this is what happens to nitrocellulose when you tour it for 5 years and you sweat on it and you leave it in a van and it gets cold and then you take it into a warm venue. Bits start falling off it. Much like me, really. And it's just an incredibly cool guitar that, like more so than any other guitar I've ever had, I think, just kind of feels like me. The moment I pick it up, I'm like, oh, cool, I'm home. I know exactly how it's going to react. I know what it's going to do. Just the bond that you kind of develop with guitars is strange as well. Like, I need to fix this, but it's quite funny, I guess, and it's kind of indicative of the connection I have with this guitar, that we were touring in Ireland, I think maybe. Well, we were in Northern Ireland, we were in Belfast, and I was restringing, and there's a little kind of like washer, like a half-moon washer there, basically stops this saddle from just freely kind of moving up and down, and obviously that dictates your intonation, so it's fairly important that that stays in one position, otherwise you end up essentially with a fretless guitar. And the little half-moon washer, while I was restringing, fell out and disappeared down between a crack in the floorboards on stage. I was like, oh, well, there we go, that's great. So, using the only thing that I had to hand, which was a foil wrapper from a bar of chocolate, I wedged that down in there to stop it moving. That was in November of last year, and it's still there. But it hasn't moved, so I think I'm onto something, and I'm going to patent it. But like, just weird little things like that. This is so much my guitar that it just goes everywhere with me, and you know, it's kind of cool to have a guitar like that, I guess. As much as I collect guitars like a lunatic, and every time I see a nice one, I fall in love with that for 5 minutes. A bigger part of me loves the idea of being Rory Gallagher and just having a guitar where like, oh, that's his guitar, and this is kind of turning into that for me, I guess. So yeah, it's cool. It's oh, yeah, I sweat like a demon. I think I sweat acid as well, I've come to the conclusion, because we were talking about it earlier, how frequently I change strings. I would change strings mid-gig if I could. It's kind of, I think I genuinely must have like a corrosive sweat or something, because I sweat a bit when you play, because you get into it. But what will happen is you can kind of snap them out the next day and they will sound pretty fresh. But 9 times out of 10, if I don't restring after a gig, I'll get halfway through the next gig and then pop. And usually the thicker strings will go. It'll be like an E string or an A string will go. And again, when I play, it's bad technique is what it is, but I like to put it down to enthusiasm. My right hand turns into Thor's hammer, and I give it a fair old whack. It's the principal reason I use quite heavy strings, is that there's not many strings where you can kind of give it a big old, and it doesn't go and wobble its way into tune. So yeah, I sweat and I break through strings a lot. But I think, again, that's probably testament to the guitar being as kind of corroded as it is. Bits of paint missing. Obviously, all the paint around the volume pot has kind of disappeared over the years. So it's a cool guitar. In regard to the rest of the setup today, Helix. I don't use Helix on a kind of daily basis. I use the HX Stomp XL, which is a kind of condensed version of that, I guess. It pretty much does all of the same stuff that the Helix does, but in a smaller format. And that goes on my pedalboard. Any of the weird kind of like harmonic trems, or any of the kind of weird like the ambient, you kind of like all that kind of weirder stuff, 9 times out of 10 comes from the Helix. A funny thing with, I bought an amp about a year ago, maybe, a 1962 Fender Concert. Primarily, the reason I bought that amp was it was a kind of quite a weird series of amps the Fender did back in the early 60s, which had harmonic tremolo. Harmonic tremolo being an effect I use all the time, which is this kind of tremolo. So you've got that kind of like slight amplitude variation, but there is undoubtedly a kind of like a modulation in there as well. Bit univibey, bit weird, cool effect, and I probably overuse it. And it's based on these old Fender amps. So I was kind of like, as much as that's great, and it does sound like a very convincing harmonic trem, I was like, I want to get the real thing. So I went out of my way to find this 1962 Fender Concert, with this idea of like, well, I can pair that with my super reverb, and then one can do the harmonic tremolo, one won't be doing the harmonic tremolo. It'll sound massive on stage, it'll be amazing. Went there, fell in love with it, bought it. First gig, our front of house guy was like, "Oh, that's just a nightmare." I was like, "Why?" He's like, "Well, it's not coming out of both amps." She's like, "I like to pan your amps out the front to give a bit of sense of width." And he said, "That side of the crowd now feels seasick, and that side of the crowd has no idea what's going on. Can you just go back to using the Helix, please?" I'm like, "Okay." So, what I basically bought was a very expensive brown box. So, I guess the point being, that long-winded way of saying the harmonic trem in the Helix sounds great. Pretty much everything in the Helix sounds great. The main thing it has going for it in this scenario is that the alternative would have been bringing my pedalboard, which weighs a fair bit, albeit not as much as it used to. And then you've got to find an amp that is kind of complementary with that, and an amp that you know how it sounds, or reacts in the same way with your pedals that you would kind of expect it to react. The reality of doing stuff like this is I flew in this afternoon, I'm going to Gothenburg tomorrow, and then flying home first thing on Friday. Why are you carting a pedalboard around for that? Do you try and source an amp? What are you doing? There's all of these kind of like infinite variables, which are just a pain in the arse. As opposed to just going, well, I know exactly how that sounds, because that's the same one I've got at home, and I literally just stick my preset on it, and away we go, and I'll just essentially plug it into a PA speaker. Is it the same as being plugged into an amp? No. Is it better or worse? No, it's just different. Is it massively more practical? Yes. And it also saves money on airlines as well. So it is what it is. I'm fairly pragmatic when it comes to gear. I just use whatever it is makes a noise for the most part. I have things that I like, and there's specific pedals, specific amps, combinations, guitars, clearly. But I had so many years of playing like divey pubs and clubs and all kind of manner of crap in South Wales with whatever stuff you could get hold of, that I'm really not averse to just kind of trying to get a tune out of anything. If it's got 6 strings, I'm happy. If it's got 5 strings, that'll do. So I'm fairly pragmatic when it comes to gear. All of the Friday Fretwork stuff was all digital, as either Helix or Guitar Rig. And you say that to people, you say that to cork sniffers, and they're like, "That's horrendous. Why would you do that? May you be banished to tone purgatory for the rest of your days." I'm like, "Well, you didn't know until I told you it was digital, did you?" And he'd be like, "No." So pragmatic, it's easier and it's cheaper and it sounds the same wherever you go. So that's the gear. I don't know what that is. That's a Fender something or other, Tone Master, like a full range flat response speaker, which I've never used before. And to be honest, is the only bit of the thing that I don't like tonight. So there we go. I'm not saying this because Yamaha have snipers at the back of the room. The kind of speaker that I normally use with a Helix is the Line 6 power cab. And I imagine if you use the power cab in the way I'm using this, which is essentially as a PA speaker, it would sound equally as indifferent. Where the power cab particularly excels is it actually has like speaker emulations built into it, which for some reason sound a load better to me than IRs. IRs I always kind of struggle with. They're impulse responses. They're kind of like profiles, I guess, of speakers. They always sound a little bit flat and a little bit one-dimensional. Power cab emulations, for whatever reason, always sound a load better. So.
are warm. Yes, you are warm. Your spark blows me to pieces. 'Cause it's you are warm.
The first solo in that track, there's a kind of a short little solo before the big epic one, which always makes me laugh whenever I'm doing it. And the reason is that was when we started recording the second record, or when we started writing the second record. It was a bit daunting, actually. Every band I've ever been in, we've only ever released one record, basically, because nobody liked it. So this is the first band where people have actually been like, "Are you going to make a second record?" We're like, "Oh, great, I hadn't thought that far ahead." And then suddenly, after like 2 years or something of touring that first record, you get to the end of that process, and then suddenly you're like, right, go write a second one now. Which I'm not very good at, this idea of like writing on demand or being creative on demand. Honestly, that was the hardest bit of Friday Fretworks, was the consistency of like, you got to do it every week. If you're ill, whatever, it doesn't matter. If you're not feeling particularly creative, you got to sit down, press record on the camera, and away you go and try and make something musical. I'm not very good at that on command, and I kind of found myself in that situation with the second record. It's kind of like, right, well, me and Tom kind of split the writing equally. For the first record, it was pretty much 50-50, songs of mine, songs of his. Pretty much the case with the second record as well. Tom is very good at just like sit at a piano, sit at a guitar, bash out a song. I can't do that. If I sit down with a guitar and go, write a song, I'm like, I'll just play FIFA instead. So my only kind of port of call really was to go through an old drawer and start digging out old iPhones. And that, or this idea of Your Spark Blows Me to Pieces, was on an iPhone that I had in about, 2014. And I had a demo of that track, which was like an acoustic kind of like strummed thing. And the melody for the first little guitar solo was what I'd intended, I guess, to be the melody. Because I found this thing on my phone, which was... Hang on, no, that's the actual melody of the song, isn't it? What is it? I tell you what, let's play it.
'Cause it's you are warm.
Entire guitar solo was the melody which I'd whistled into my phone. And the best thing about phone demos is you go back, at the moment you're doing it, in your head it's fully formed, it's orchestral, it's symphonic, there's all of these amazing things swirling round, and what you actually commit to your iPhone is and you've got to try and pick it apart and go. And what's invariably happened is if you're particularly pleased with it, at that moment you've like put an asterisk next to it and go, amazing, use this is brilliant. And then you go back to it and go, what is this? This is diabolical. But thankfully I kind of persevered with that. And I tend not to get involved in vocal melodies for a couple of reasons. A, I don't think I'm particularly great at it, but also I'm conscious that Tom has to sing them. They have to kind of fit in a way which Tom finds comfortable to sing and fits words that he's comfortable singing and writing. So I kind of let him handle that. But that was my way of kind of shoehorning in my little whistled melody. Badly whistled melody was to kind of record that guitar solo with that original melody. I tend to find the more overdrives you put on, the better I sound. Joking aside, the way I tend to set overdrives is that they're very subtle. So more often than not, if you look at the actual position of the knobs on them, they will be barely on. It's more for a kind of cumulative effect if you stack them. So like one of the gain sounds I use all the time, and I've kind of tried to recreate it in the Helix actually, is a combination of two pedals. It's a Marshall Bluesbreaker or a Marshall Bluesbreaker style pedal. Add in like a very subtle bit of grit. So make sure I'm in tune so it sounds somewhat decent. So, flipping heck. Right, so we've got... Not that. What's happening? So, clean tone. Kick on the blues breaker. Not a huge amount of gain there. Stack that with a clon, which again, if you listen to the clon in isolation, barely changes it. Put that with the blues breaker. You got your kind of classic rock tone. That's like my main overdrive sound, I guess, throughout the course of the set. Is two pedals that, if you use them in isolation, barely do anything. The cumulative effect of stacking both of those creates that sound. So it's about flavors, and I was speaking to someone about it earlier, actually. I've never gone in on the idea of like, this plus this every night equals this. And that's why I don't use like presets or banks or like set combinations of pedals every night, because it varies from room to room. Some rooms, you kind of feel like you need a little bit more help. You want a bit more gain to get you over the line. Other rooms, or if you're having a great night, you think, I can probably play a little bit cleaner tonight. I don't need as much gain. At which point, having a button that you press which triggers these specific pedals doesn't really kind of feel conducive to getting the best out of you on that particular night. So it probably is overkill. There's always a lot of overdrive pedals on my board. That's my kind of weakness, I guess. That's my Achilles heel. But I just love playing with them. I love experimenting. They do different things. They inspire different playing. This one of the overdrive pedals I use a lot is called the small speaker overdrive, and it's essentially meant to make whatever amp you plug it into sound like an old, tiny little like a Tweed Fender Champ or a Princeton or one of those cool old amps that like Neil Young would make sound like it's on the verge of exploding. It kind of does that to whatever amp you put it into. And the stuff I've played or kind of written or recorded with that pedal, which categorically I just wouldn't have done with another pedal, because it just inspires you in a different way. It's about the tone you get out of them ultimately, but it's also about the creativity which it sort of inspires. You know, a solo in a track called I'm Ready. I'll tell you what, let me play that. So that's like a proper old blues, kind of like Dirty Down, you know, Otis Redding, kind of Motown soul, whatever you want to call it. Probably I wouldn't have written that track if I hadn't have been messing around with that pedal and it just making you want to play a bit of a kind of like... all that kind of cool old kind of blues stuff. I probably wouldn't have written that if it wasn't for that specific overdrive. And as much as that's something I'm always keen to stress, is don't get too bogged down in the gear. The gear is just the conduit or just the source of inspiration to kind of make you play better, just the means of you expressing yourself. That is kind of the flip side of that. That's the effect it can have. It can bring actual, pretty much fully formed songs out of you, you know. So what I'm saying is buy more Overdrive pedals. Let's have one more question and then I'll let you all go.
What about Fuzzes?
Fuzz, same. Buy more Fuzz pedals. Just pedals generally, really. Fuzz pedals I'm a bit of a sucker for. I've got... my main fuzz pedal is a Mythos Golden Fleece, which is like a little kind of one knob fuzz pedal. Super simple. I quite like simple pedals because I'm a simple man. Where there's not too much to kind of get bogged down in or whatever, you know. But like, I think probably my favorite fuzz pedal of all time, I've got an old 90s Cornell Dallas Arbiter fuzz face, which is just great. They're getting hideously expensive the past couple of years. It was the first ever pedal I had. My dad, bless him, bought it from a music magazine because I think he recognized it from like photos of Hendrix. So he bought that for me. Not long after I'd started playing guitar, I had a Squier Telecaster. I had a little 10-watt PV Rage and quite an expensive fuzz face. And I couldn't get it to work because I was plugging it in backwards. So I just never used it. I was like, well, this doesn't work. I haven't got the heart to tell him it doesn't work. It probably didn't have a battery in it either. So it sat under my bed for a very long time. And then when I started getting into pedals, dug it out. I was like, this is amazing. So that kind of sent me on the fuzz face kind of kick. So, yeah, they're just... Pedals are cool as long as you don't become over-reliant on the idea of I have to have these specific pedals or that specific amp or this specific guitar to make me happy or make me sound like me. That's a bridge too far, but they can be super inspiring. It's just, you know, and that's the problem. Pretty much buying gear like that is my only hobby, which is dangerous when it's tied to your work, because then you can always justify it. You can always justify another purchase because you can write it off against tax. So there we go. That's end on that, really. Become a musician. Get your pedals for free. One more. Go on. Yeah.
So for the parts that you're not soloing, basically doing the backing.
Oh, the boring bits, yeah.
But what you're doing is very brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
So what are the thought process?
Genuinely, thank you. That's something that I've kind of put a lot of effort into the past couple of years, is rhythm playing. And rhythm playing is massively underappreciated, as are great rhythm players. Like, I think, again, subconsciously, as a massive Guns N' Roses fan as a kid, if you presented with Izzy Stradlin or Slash as like a kind of wide-eyed 14-year-old, you're going to go, Slash, I want to play the fast stuff. So Izzy's stuff, at least at a kind of like a cursory level, kind of passed me by. And it wasn't until years later when you're listening to it and going, actually, what he's doing is incredible. Because it's never just doubling up, which is what I was super guilty of. Whenever I would play rhythm parts, I would just either play the riff, play the chords, whatever, play what the bass player was playing, at which point it just becomes a bit of a sludgy, too much of the same stuff happening at once. And that's not what rhythm guitar is about. It's not what bass guitar is about. It's not what any instrument is about. It's about identifiable parts that work for the track. And I think the first moment where I kind of put a huge amount of thought into that was Tell Me How It Feels. Again, I played it earlier. Obviously, the solo is the bit that everyone kind of like focuses in on. But when we were recording that, the chords for the song, let's have a look. So the chorus, for example. Tell me that feels, baby. Tell me that I'm supposed to know. I was just playing that initially. I was going... which is fine. It's the chords of the song. But when we started tracking that in the studio, it suddenly became apparent that, like, oh, well, that's just... doesn't really work. It's just a bit boring. It's a bit bland. It doesn't kind of lift the part. So I came up with this. It's not complex, it's not particularly hard, but it instantly was like, oh, that feels right. That bounces off the core, off the kind of vocal melody. It kind of works well with the keys. It's complementary to the bass. It's not complex. It's just the right part for that moment, you know? And that was a little bit of a light bulb moment for me in terms of like, well, if I'm the only guitar player in the band, I've got so much sonic space there. The only thing in Cardinal Black which kind of infringes on my sonic territory is the keys. That kind of sits in that same kind of like dense mid-range kind of thing. But apart from that, everyone else is kind of out of my way. I guess vocals occasionally, but like it gives you so much space to kind of play with. So I just started putting a lot more thought into rhythm parts, I guess, ultimately. And it's choosing the right bits to play or knowing what not to play is just, it's hard to kind of put into words, because I guess it's just a taste thing and it's an experience thing. The more time you spend doing it, the better you get at it. But you can kind of expedite that process by listening to guys who are great at it. Izzy Stradlin, Malcolm Young, any great kind of like rhythm players who just play interesting stuff. You listen to like Izzy Stradlin, especially with like all the AI like stem splitting stuff recently. I've gone down such a rabbit hole of like dissecting songs I love and like picking bits out of them that I've just never been able to particularly hear all that well. And Izzy Stradlin's part on like Welcome to the Jungle, for example, you listen to it in isolation, you're like, what is he doing? That's awful. And then you put it in the track, you're like, that's brilliant. I can't think of anything else you would play in that moment that would work as well as that. It's like scratchy and it's raw. Slash is doing the big kind of like, you know, etc., etc. Listen to Izzy's part. Izzy's like, it's almost like a kind of reggae kind of thing. And you're like, in isolation, that sounds awful. Put those two, like hard left and hard right in the stereo field, and it's just like this magnetic, like bouncing kind of effect. You're like, that's brilliant. Malcolm Young as well. Malcolm Young, just this like relentless right hand of like, that's the sound of AC/DC for me. As much as everyone goes like, oh, Bon or Brian or Angus or whatever, all of that like driving like energy, it's Phil Rudd and it's Malcolm Young and it's Cliff Williams. You know, it's that rhythm section ultimately. So that it gets massively overlooked as an art form as to how to write great, memorable rhythm parts. How to write memorable, great rhythm parts, I don't know. I'm probably not the guy to answer that question. But if you're trying to do it, just try and put yourself in the shoes of someone whose rhythm work you... Eddie Van Halen, like, for such a, like, revolutionary, you know, kind of incredible, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of, yeah, revolutionary. I guess Hendrix and Van Halen stand apart as kind of two guys that like reinvented the wheel almost. Everyone goes for the like, the tap in and the kind of like crazy stuff. His rhythm playing is outstanding. It's one of the best rhythm players of all time, and that gets massively overlooked because he's Eddie Van Halen and he's playing Eruption. You know, it's kind of like you lose sight of the fact that like, well, listen to Panama. Panama is incredible. Just tight, aggressive, like rhythmic, percussive rhythm playing. James Hetfield, again, like all of James Hetfield's stuff, his downstrokes, there's no alternate pick in there. You try and play Master of Puppets, like alternate. Doesn't sound right. I'm not very good at it, that entirely downstroke thing. It's hard to do. But it gives you that like kind of like chug that it has. So that's not really an answer to your question, is it really? But just there ends my thesis on rhythm players. Anyone else want to hear me talk about things I like? Let's have one more. You were going to shoot me in a minute. One more question.
Like I said, on that topic, can you talk about your right hand? From pick to
Fingers, yeah.
Is it the part of the song, or what do you think about that?
Again, like, I get a lot of questions on that, and I never know how to answer it because it's so like innate at this point. People are like, "Oh, so why did you switch to your fingers? Why did you switch to your fingers in that bit?" I'm like, I don't know. You might as well ask the cat. I don't know what I'm doing. It's, I guess, ultimately trying to reverse engineer it and trying to look back at like video or recordings of myself and go, oh, I'm playing with my fingers on that bit. It's softer, it's rounder. It's probably when subconsciously I'm trying to say something a little bit more kind of delicately. There's such a like fleshy tone that you can get, you know. But if you play with your nail, you get that almost like pick kind of esque attack. It doesn't quite sound like a pick, but you can kind of do a convincing impression of a pick. What a pick can't do is give you this. That all in one little movement, soft, soft, bright. If you play softly with a pick, it's still got like it still sounds like plastic to me. It still sounds like a kind of, I don't know, something digging in a little bit harder. It hasn't got that dynamic or textural range, but this... dig in. You've kind of got the same... Cheers. You've kind of got the same capacity to be able to kind of make notes really pop out with your fingers. At the same time, I'm not one of these guys going, oh, ditch the pick, just play with your fingers. Because there's stuff I do with a pick that I just can't do with my fingers. I'm so much more accurate with a plectrum. And when it calls for it, I can play faster with a plectrum. Try and do a super fast... Kind of do it, but it doesn't sound as good as... There's like a confidence I've got when I'm doing that with a pick, because I know exactly, apparently, where I'm going to land. So, you know, it's, like I said, it's quite innate, and it's hard to reverse engineer that, oh, well, that's when I play with a pick, or that's when I play with the fingers. But it just gives you a softness and a kind of dynamic and a textural range that you don't get if you just play with that, you know. So, like, I kind of consider myself weirdly lucky in that the technique to do that was kind of like decided for me. That nail on that finger is crap. Snaps like a wet Kit Kat at the first sign of trouble. Just, I don't know why. It's just a terrible nail. It just snaps. So the idea of like playing a string with that nail, I can feel it like flexing and bending. It's horrible. It's just a horrible sensation. So I was like, well, that might as well, if you're not doing anything, put you to good use there and just tuck that in there. And then straight away, I've got my thumb, got my second, I've got my ring finger, kind of this claw. Just got my thumb for the bass, second finger for like D and A string, and ring finger for anything. Kind of all fell into place for me, I guess, because that nail was so crap. And I was like, well, you'll live there then. I know other people kind of tuck it in between their fingers, or, you know, there's all kind of manner of different ways of doing this, and it's far from unique to me. But just it all kind of fell into place for me. And the reason I started doing that was just boredom. Sat on the sofa watching crap on the TV, probably dropped the pick and it disappeared into that netherworld that plectrums go when you drop it, along with pen lids. I was like, oh, cool, I can't be asked to go and get another one. I'll see if I can play the same stuff with my fingers as I can with a pick. And the answer initially was no. But if you keep practicing it and just kind of put a bit of effort into it, it just opens up another world of stuff that you can't necessarily do. So, right, I gotta go.
Let's talk about your little finger.
Little finger. Oh, yeah, that doesn't do anything.
It's constantly your anchor.
Yeah, it's my rock. I love it. I made a video on this a while ago. It was like a lot of crap on YouTube about, oh, you just don't use your little finger. I do, like chord stuff like that. You know, I assume you're talking about left hand as opposed.
Actually, talk about your right hand.
Oh, right hand, yeah. Oh, God knows what that does. I've never given that a moment's thought. I'm gonna have to figure this out. I don't think it does anything.
Can I have it then?
You can have it if you want. Yeah. I don't think I've ever noticed I got a little finger on my right hand, to be honest, until now. He's just there, as is that one, to be honest. That one gets involved on chords.
Just all the time how you use it as an anchor of sorts.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. I don't know. I'll get back to you on that one. Come see me in Gothenburg tomorrow, I'll have an answer. But there we go. My useless little finger. That's the name of this lecture series. So thank you all for coming. Sorry I've kept you so long.